first part is a little bit high level. Then we're going to get down in the weeds a little bit. And then we're going to do a case study of a real project located here in Georgia. And if you have any questions, stop me along the way. If we cover some details that you just don't understand, but you want to know more, I'm going to be around. My team's going to be around afterwards. So you can ask me any questions that you want. Fair enough? Okay. All right, so what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about the different types of local incentives. Many of you use these in your project closings. We're going to talk about why it's important to have a strategy at the local level for incentives. We're going to talk about several examples of tax abatements and some considerations or some things you need to think about. And then we're going to talk about how you measure if you're getting a return on your incentives. And last one is case study. Like different types of local incentives. Like first, let's distinguish. What we're talking about today are just those that you at the local authority level can offer. This is not a comprehensive list. These are just some of the more common types of local incentives. We're not going to cover any state or federal incentives that you might leverage your local programs to obtain. So at the local level, cash grants, free land, discounted building rents, site prep, waiving fees, free office space during construction of a new facility, employee relocation or moving expenses, and tax abatements. Now let's talk about the differences with some of these incentives. Some of these reduce a project's upfront cost. Some are deferred. Now, in your experience, which ones are more valuable to a project? Upfront. Yeah, upfront, right? They want the risk and upfront cost reduced. Now, if you have a plan at the local level, well, let me ask you this way. How many of you just have a lot of money sitting in a bank, and so when a project comes along and it makes sense, you can just write a check? Talk to this guy. But the point is, you need a plan. If you're going to do any kind of deal closing funds, you need a plan for where those funds are going to come from. And you've got to have that kind of plan in place before you can make the offer to the prospect. How many of you use either SPLOST or get maybe funding through a millage appropriation? How many or through some long-term agreement with your city and county? How many of you have something like that and maybe have some funds set aside for some type of deal closing? Okay, very good. Takeaway on that very point. Takeaway on that very point. How long did it take you to put that in place? Was it easy? Yeah, and it requires constant communication on your part. I would say one of your most important roles as executive director at the development authority level is building that team, having a strong board, and having that board communicate to your internal partners so that they understand why it's important that you have a plan for incentives, why it's important that you have funds for deal closing. Now, a couple of these things, one other point I want to make before we leave this. A couple of these you can do before a project arrives, right? Site prep, getting utilities in place. Those are things you can do to remove risk or reduce risk, and you can do that before the project is in hand or that you're trying to put a best and final offer on the table. Can you write a check to a project? No. Many of these are subject to the gratuities law. So you've got to wrap these local incentives either into your bonds for title agreement or into some property, real or personal, that you're going to hold title to, and it's got to be tied into that leaseback. So work with a qualified attorney and make any of these things you want to offer legal. All right, using local incentives. Match your incentives to what the needs of the project are. How do you find out what a project needs? If you put that list on the previous page in front of a prospect and any others that you may use at the local level, if you put the list in front of them and say, what do you need? What are they going to say? I need all of them. Absolutely. So how do you really find out what the critical needs are? You ask. Let's ask, okay? And so don't just assume that what worked for one project is what's needed for the next. Let's ask up front. And that way, if it's something that's needed, that's a critical need for you to close the deal, and it's not something you've done before, you need as much time as possible to figure out how you can address that need. How many of you, I know none of you do it, but how many of you have really enthusiastic chairman or board members, and they're helping you with a prospect visit, and the prospect says, we need X, Y, and Z, and the words I hear are, whatever you need. Whatever you need. Well, I've seen prospects take that literally. Hey, you promised. You know, you made a commitment that whatever we needed, that you said that water line was going to be upgraded. You know, you said the water flow would be there. You said that you could address our fire protection needs and have on-site protection at no cost to us. So determine what's needed, determine what you can afford to do, and don't overpromise. I'd rather see you underpromise and overcommit later on, overdeliver later on. Leverage your grants, leverage your upfront incentives to hopefully reach out and obtain other incentive programs that are available at the state and federal level. Lastly, tie your incentives, I know all of you do this, but I don't want to leave this out, tie your incentives to job creation and to them making certain levels of capital investment. All right, this is an example of an actual policy that one of my communities has put in place for tax abatements. And they've got 3 tiers. And this approach applies to existing or new industry. So they try to make it fair for existing industry or new industry. And what this is saying is, for Tier 1, a project must create at least 15 full-time jobs. So 15 jobs is their minimum trigger. That's their minimum threshold. And so if that project will create 15 jobs, they qualify for 5 years, up to 5 years of tax abatements, and it's targeted for them to obtain a 35% savings off what would normally be their full property taxes. Now, here's the way that they work their system. For Tier 2, if you create at least 50 jobs and $10 million in capital investment, you're going to qualify for a 10-year schedule, saving about 50% in taxes. And it goes both ways. If you have $30 million in investment and 15 jobs, 15 or more jobs, but less than 50 jobs, you still qualify for Tier 2 in their approach. Now, this is just an example with tax abatements. You can do something like this for free land. In other words, if you wanted to give away, if you had how many of you have a subdivision plan of some type for at least one or more of your industrial sites? So you've got various parcels that you generally have an idea for. And so you can do something like this for 25 acres, or for 50 acres, or for 100 or more acres. In other words, tie free land to some thresholds on jobs and capital investment. So you can do it for other types of incentives is the point. All right, questions so far? All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Because we had this discussion. If you had fewer jobs, but they paid 200% of the average wage, do you play with that at all?
Thank you. All right, that was coming later, but now's a better time. All right, to Peggy's point, and you can either tie this to your first tiered approach, or you can have something a little more comprehensive, which is, let's say, with the example, with this example, if you had 15 full-time jobs paying the average manufacturing wage or average draw wage, manufacturing wage, you give them a 35% savings. But if they create 15 or more jobs and they're paying 150% of the average manufacturing wage, you either lengthen the schedule or increase the amount of savings. In other words, 15 is still a threshold. You still got to be 15 jobs minimum, but you can tie your savings or the length of your schedule to the average wage rates. And another reason for you to consider doing that is you might have how many of you have a targeted industry strategy? In other words, you have 4 or 5 industry groups that based on your workforce, based on your demographics, based on what you want to try to draw or attract, you have some targets. You have certain consultants that you want to work with, you have certain trade shows that you want to try to recruit for. So with those industry targets, you're hopefully setting those targets because the wage rates are higher than your average wage. How many of you have industry targets? Target industry approach, okay? Very good point, Peggy. So you can tie your incentives, either for abatements or for property, to a wage schedule. Good point.
Jim?
Yes.
On this matrix, the targeted tax savings, 35%, is that, are you indicating that as 35% for all 5 years? Or are you just saying
35%
averaged over that?
averaged over all 5 years. I'm going to show you a specific example coming up. Yeah. All right. Why have a policy on the front end? Why not just put something together when the prospect arrives? Well, guess what? How often today, when you get an RFI and they lay out some phases for investment, some phases for jobs, you know what type of industry it is, so you can kind of guess or gauge what the wage rates are going to be. And in that RFI, while they're asking you about your utilities that are in place, how far your site is from the interstate, they're asking all this normal stuff. How many times do they also ask, hey, what kind of local incentives do you have available? How frequently do you see that in the RFIs? Lots, right? Very common. So if you have a table or a policy that you can refer to, you're not slowing down your response, right? If you've got to go to your board and to some of your local partners and say, hey, I got to answer this question, what do you want to do for this project? And you got to do that every time, you're getting bogged down. You know, having the policy in place on the front end, at least you know a minimum that you can respond, how you can respond with your RFI. Gives you a lot of confidence and image with the prospect. Tie your levels or your tiered approach to different levels of jobs and investment. Make it fair for new or existing industry. And lastly, give it to the newspaper. Let them see what you're offering. Let them be your friend, not somebody that's going to always be criticizing.
Just a quick question. On that
Yeah.
tiered strategy, what size community is that?
This 44,000, 45,000. Yeah. But I will tell you, we've done 3 or 4 like that, and really the only difference is what their job level minimums are. Some have 25 jobs, and then some will go either longer for big investment projects and give just a greater amount of tax savings. I can send you some examples if you like.
We just don't have many with that kind of capital investment altogether.
Okay, that's a good point that I've left out. Let me tell you why we have 10. So you're saying you see a fair number of projects with 2 or 3 or 4 million, right? All right, guess what? To make these tax abatements legal, they're going to incur some transaction costs that you're going to expect the project to pay for. And the transaction costs, I use a rule of thumb of this. And again, it depends on what your county and school millage rates are. The higher the millage, the less the amount of investment they can actually do. If you have really fairly low millage rates, relatively speaking, you've got to see this $10 million threshold so that they can realize enough savings to justify offsetting the transaction costs. We typically see projects want to get those transaction costs back within the first or second year of those tax abatement savings. Everybody kind of understand that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we've struggled with what about these projects that only create $2 or $3 million in new investment, and it's just hard for you. It's hard for you to have a policy out there that nobody's ever going to be able to take advantage of. I guess the only other way around that is find you a local attorney who can get up to speed on how to make that legal and who won't charge you a lot.
Or either up the percentages for savings.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do that, but I've worked some examples with 3 million, you really gotta go about 100% for 10 years almost. But
If that's all they're seeing.
that's all you see? Well, are the abatements really the most critical thing to make those projects work? You know, let's figure out another.
Land, and we're giving away a couple $100,000 in land.
Right, the land,
4 million in project.
right, figure out something else instead of the abatements. Good point. All right, now's when we're gonna get into the weeds a little bit with some tax schedules. All right, if you look at the highlighted areas, Department of Revenue has 4 approved personal property or equipment schedules. They're standard, Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, Group 4. Most of the projects you will see will be Group 2 or Group 3. Group 4, if you're working data center projects and you're that lucky, you're going to see some Group 4 projects. If you have some office or corporate headquarters projects, you'll see some Group 1 projects. But most of you will see Group 2 or Group 3 projects. Now, that said, in this arbitrary example, I'm showing a Department of Revenue depreciation schedule for all wood-related industries. They fall under Group 2, and the Department of Revenue allows depreciation over an 8 to 12-year period, and these are their percentages that the company reports on its personal property return. Initial investment, $30 million. This is just standard percentages that's provided by Department of Revenue and accepted by your local tax assessor. The takeaway with this $30 million project that happens to be all equipment is that by year 10, you've got a $7.5 million investment being reported on your tax base, not 30. All right, so you started at 30. Even in year 1, they got to write off 8% of it. So initial impact to your tax base is only about $28 million. Now, how many of you have ever worked a project? I'm not picking on Deloitte and Touche. It's very common for them and other consultants that have strong accounting backgrounds. This can be negotiated. If your tax assessor and your leadership is willing to accept a change, it's just more mechanics on the back end for them, they'll ask for faster write-downs on equipments. How many of you have ever done something like that? Okay? So it's allowable. I just want you to know that. Your tax assessor, you better be taking them lunch frequently because they don't like those kinds of changes because they're going to manage this for 10 years. And it's an exception. But know that it can be done. If you've got to do it to close a deal, know that it can be done. Lastly, this quote, special schedule, this is determined by you, the development authority. You can make these percentages, as Peggy just said, you can make them anything you want to. You can do 100% for 10 years if you want to. Tough for you to sell locally, I believe, but you could do that. In this example, I have some communities that offer much more aggressive schedules than this. I have some that always want to, they're averse to even doing 100% in year 1 because they want to be able to say that the company is making some contribution even in the first year. Now, takeaway, if you remember my tiered approach on incentives, $30 million was the minimum investment for Tier 2. They were going to try to offer the company a 50% savings, Wally, to answer your question, over time. In this example, with all equipment, it works out with this kind of offer by you, it works out that they save 56%. Said another way, they paid 44% of their full value of their taxes. All right. If you offer a more aggressive approach here, or let them write it down faster, they're going to save more. Okay. Now, let's distinguish between the impacts of personal property and real property. Example 2. Project investment is the same. It's $30 million. In this example, arbitrary example, the investment is all in real property. So not $30 million in equipment, but $30 million in real property. At the end of year 10, you still have $30 million impact to your tax base. The schedule, to make my point, is the same, 90% in year one, declining 10% a year. If you see, Wally, in this case, that stayed the same, the investment stayed the same, but because there's no depreciation, the company's actually only saving 45% of their normal full tax bill, and they're paying 55%. So if you, another takeaway that your leadership is going to be most interested in, and especially your school board, because both examples have the same millage rates. In the previous example, the company pays about $900,000 in pilot payments. In the second example, with real property, they pay more than double that, even though the schedule's the same. So I just want you to see or understand the impacts. It's rare that a project's going to be all personal property or all real property. But I just want you to understand the impacts when somebody brings you a $50 million project. If $40 million of it's real and only $10 million is equipment, that's going to be a more valuable project than if it's flipped. $10 million in real property, $40 million in equipment, which is built.
On education, we don't give any abatement on
School.
education. How does that typically run? We feel that for coming to our community, educated people, workers, then they
I'm going to speak from my...
And we've had no problem with that.
Right. I want my other teammates to jump in. That's unique. I commend you for that. Many communities do at least something on school taxes more of the time than those communities that their policy is we're not going to abate school taxes. So,
You want to take a show of hands?
Mr. Hughes, oh, you couldn't hear him?
We did, no, I say you take a show of hands, because we do a pilot, we do payment in lieu of taxes.
For school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will tell you, we will do a show of hands. Let me tell you one other way you can, to not address Bill's need. Don't change what you're doing. I have seen communities do a 10-year schedule for the county taxes and only do a 3 or 4 year schedule for the school taxes. Meaning they go ahead and begin recovering some revenues for the school board. And really communities will understand that. I'm going to show you a slide in a few minutes about what happens when households are created and when students are added to your school system. Every new student is a direct incremental cost, pretty much, for your school board. And so,
The reason saying that is, are we sitting out in left field by ourselves by not giving?
well, I would answer that this way: or have you lost a project because if you had somebody walk away because you weren't willing to abate school tax?
We have not. As a matter of fact, our 3 most recent, and this is over a period of time, have said that we recognize the need for trained employees, and the way we get them is through education. Therefore, we'll pay for it. And we've been very positive.
Show of hands. How many of you don't abate school taxes? Wow, more than I thought. So the rest of you will do both, right? Okay. The other way I would address that is maybe it doesn't, and y'all jump in and tell me, maybe that's not the critical factor. Tax abatements are not the critical factor. Meaning you haven't lost any projects because there's probably been some other needs that you successfully addressed that were more important to the project.
Well, we don't know. We may have lost the project. That didn't come to us. We feel pretty comfortable with the ones that have said that.
Okay. I do know a number of communities have, a few of my communities have that same approach, but more of them abate both. All right. We're going to get out of the weeds after I do this slide. But I want to show you a very unique way to address a project need that you may not have thought of. This is the rare exception. So when you leave here, do not go running back home and talk to your for most of your deals, because you're going to get in trouble at some point down the road if you do. You want to do this example that I'm going to show you for that existing industry that's been there 20 years or more, and you know that you have a lot of faith, you have a real good understanding that they're going to be there another 20 years. This example is, or this offer is something you would consider for a very credit-worthy company. And what we're going to talk about is you monetizing the tax abatements, meaning you're going to give them a present value or give them a dollar amount up front They're gonna get their money up front and not have to wait and save on their property tax bill over some period of time. And the way that works is, you can see my investment went up. I see a use for this more of the time when you have a company competing against another company within its same family. In other words, your Georgia facility is competing against a Florida or a Texas or a Tennessee facility owned by the same. I'll give you an example. Angie and I did this one with Triumph. Triumph had facilities in Dallas, Charleston, and Fort Stewart, Florida, and several of them had existing capacity. They were underutilized. And Milledgeville at the time was going to have to add on. And so Milledgeville was behind because they had a capital cost that the other communities in other states were not going to be faced with. And so the authority, they were willing to do tax abatements, but that wasn't the company's critical need for Milledgeville. They needed cash up front to offset that building, that expansion cost. And so she had really good leadership on her board, and so what they agreed to do, several of them were bankers, there were 5 banks in the communities at the time, and Angie helped me. 3 of them agreed to participate and do this. They had lending limits. If you work with your local banks, you know they can't do a $2 million loan to one customer. Many of them can't. They have lending limits, so several of them had to pool together to make this deal work. And essentially, what we did is we took these tax savings that they would have recognized over 10 years, totaled up $1.9 million, and we did development authority was going to go out and borrow $1.6 million and pay 5% interest on the money they borrowed, and they were going to get this stream of cash flows, which was going to do the debt service on the loan. Everybody think about that. In other words, and if you see, what happens when you normally go borrow money? You pay a levelized payment over time, right? You pay the same amount monthly, but you jump down, it'll be a fixed amount. The beauty of this approach is you get the loan paid off very quickly. And guess what? The more incentives you offer, the more tax savings they are, the loans get paid off even quicker. So it's not a levelized stream of cash flows, and so the bankers really like that. Now, unfortunately, Triumph didn't win the business, so none of their facilities got the project. But we put this deal together a couple of times, and it's a way for you, if you don't have a pool of funds where you can offer for deal closing, it's a way for you to monetize that stream and make it work for the company. Now let's don't miss out. What are the risks? Peggy?
They leave.
Yeah, they just say, hey guys, we appreciate it, but we're done. And if they do that, if they quote default, your authority and your county is still responsible for paying that loan back. So again, this is not something you want to do for every project where you need to come up with $1 million or $2 million.
Can you lock it in your MOU? Can you lock that down to where if they do close their...
If there's something left, you sure could. But I mean, typically, if they're defaulting, it's a financial issue. You could certainly try.
You have a lien, at least.
Well, in this case, and that was another, we're getting way down the weeds now. See, the money was needed for building and equipment. This was a $50 million project, okay? We were able to generate, it was actually about $3 million was going to be the value of the loan. And that was going to really help just on the real estate part. And the development authority was going to get title to the full facility. Okay, so that was going to reduce some of their risk. The equipment, the bank, they didn't want that at all, because it was very specialized equipment for this aerospace company. But good question, you had one here.
Yeah, what are the tax ramifications to the company if you're monetizing this abatement and giving it to them in the form of a grant? They pay a lot more taxes than they would if you were doing an annual abatement, which is writing off the bottom line.
It's really not. Again, you got to tie this thing to that leaseback agreement, and this is not income for them. It's being tied to an asset. Okay? Yeah. So it's not a state or income tax liability for them. because it's not a grant. They're not gonna get a 1099-G form or something like that. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna get out of the weeds now. Any questions on any of that stuff? All right. How many of you have heard of LOCI? There are several fiscal impact tools out there. One we use is the one originally developed at Georgia Tech. Now the Economic Impact Group has that particular software. But there are several tools that will help you determine what's the return on the incentives. Look at the value of everything you're offering up front, the value of the land, the infrastructure cost, if you're doing any cash grants, if you're doing relocation, whatever you're doing, we can figure out what that upfront cost is going to be. Then we're going to measure the net new revenues, primarily from sales and property taxes that come back to your local governments and your school board, less any new cost associated with household creation. At a high level, that's how it works. So we'll compare the net benefits against the upfront cost of incentives and which one's more. This is a fiscal impact analysis. We're measuring just the returns to your local government and the school board. This is not an economic impact analysis. An economic impact analysis looks at the payroll, the turnover in the community, the new sales locally. It looks at lots of things. Economic impacts are always positive. It takes your incentives and adds that in. Okay, economic impact studies, you can get any of your universities to do one for you. It's going to always be positive. It'll be a big number too. You always, if your local leadership is concerned, what are you adding to our community here? When you do a project, get somebody to help you do an economic impact study, because it will show you a big number that you can show your leadership and show others. Your fiscal impact analysis, guess what? It can be negative, meaning you can pay more in incentives than you're going to get back in net benefits. How many of you have ever done that? A lost leader. What? Why would you do that? How'd you sell it?
If it's a Fortune ranked company, there are intangibles that have value.
Absolutely, and not even intangibles. If you know they're going to bring additional business down the road, or there's a good chance, I'll use another example with Frito-Lay. We've done 4 or 5 expansions in 15 years. You know, something up front, that initial lost leader has more than it paid for itself over time as you help them grow in the community. Lastly, how many of you, and again, I'm going to pick on some of your board members because I see and hear this all the time. Let's say you have a site and you spend a bunch of money with infrastructure and grading and all this stuff, and you can sell it, okay, but the project says, well, I need the land for free, or I need the land heavily discounted. How many of you have board members? Or take a building if you don't like my land example. You know what your sunk costs are in that building. How many of you have a board member that says, well, we got to get our money back out of that building? Come on. All right. Say it another way. How many of you think you're in the real estate business? You're in the job creation business, right? You're not in the real estate business, you're in the job creation business. And that's the toughest thing you've got to sell to your leadership. It's okay for you, the authority, to lose money on your land or building if the community is going to be more than made whole from the net new jobs and the investment in the community. So don't try to just analyze. And here, what's another reason you want to do a lost leader? Existing industry is a great example, but how about this? Don't you want to look at your results over a period of years and hopefully over a period of projects and not just one project at the time? Meaning it's okay to do that lost leader, whereas it may result in other things happening down the road, or look at it over 4 or 5, 10 years. You can't do lost leaders with every project. You're probably going to lose your job. But in certain projects, what's another reason when's another time it makes sense? You know, if they're going to pay 150% of your average wage, and most every other project you've been seeing or working going to pay draw area wages, this is a home run. You know, you're probably going to have to pay for that one. So, all right, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this. Some of y'all, all y'all who've done academy courses have seen this, but this is just, Dorfman at the University of Georgia at the time did this analysis. There's been lots of cost of community services studies done. All of them come out with the same results. Not sure why we keep doing them, but what this says is your local government to provide services for residential property or for households, to provide services that households demand, they spend $1.53 a unit on average for these 12 counties. And guess how much they get paid? $1. All right, said another way, I got a business proposal for you. Customers want our product. They definitely want it. Think of it as water and sewer service. They want it, and they're going to pay for it. And we're going to get to spend $1.53 taking it to every household so we can earn $1. Who's going to invest with me? Nobody. But how? So what? I mean, what's up with that? You know, think of it realistically. How do they get $1.53 back? You need to raise rates and not get elected again, right? Or you can grow this side of your tax base. Because look what happens over here. For every industry or commercial business you add, we only spend 39 cents for service delivery and we get paid $1. So grow this and not as much, not residential faster than the others combined. This is why you're in the economic development business. Okay, let's work a project. I'm going to give you a few minutes. I'm not going to organize you. I want y'all just to talk among yourselves in a few different teams. This is a project that's located in Georgia. It was an international firm. They had been in business for more than 30 years, still are. They were going to create 200 direct jobs, $15 million in new capital investment, just the equipment part. It was a little more in real property. They were going to have almost a $6 million payroll. That's about, I think, $29,000 a year. That was above the average wage. And the local university did an economic impact analysis, and it said the value of that project is going to mean $10 million a year in our area. In other words, the payroll turnover and some other things were going to have a positive impact of $10 million. Now, this particular project, they didn't want a site, they wanted an existing building. You have a building. The building will meet their needs. 70,000 square foot building, except your building needs $450,000 in improvements. Now, unbelievably, this project looked at 40 buildings across multiple states. They didn't look at them on paper, they went in them, they visited them. So they were down to 7. Now you can pretty much bet the 7 left standing, they would all work. So, but yours needs $450,000 improvements to work. They said, we don't want to buy the building, we want you to structure a lease, but we want an option to purchase sometime down the road. And what are the project's critical needs? The developer already asked, and it was reducing risk and startup cost. So far, there are 7 buildings left, 7 communities left, more than Georgia. And unfortunately, Georgia's got more than one finalist. So you don't know if the state, you have a good idea that the state's going to provide some discretionary funds, some edge funds for this project, but you don't have no idea, you can't bank on it. You can't bank on anything. You've got to put your best and final offer together right now. So y'all spend just a minute or two and tell me how you address some of these needs. What will your board be willing to do? Let's take a couple minutes and I'll just ask for some volunteers. The way I like to debrief this, you know, there's a couple of immediate things that I know you'll get that you see you have to address. How many of you would do the building improvements? In other words, you the authority, you make the $450,000 in improvements. You already own this building, and you're willing to do that and offer it. Now you may want to recover some of those costs in this lease purchase option you put together. But how many of you know you have to do that up front? Yeah, that's a deal killer for you. If you don't do that, they walk. They go to one of the other 6 buildings they got left on the list, okay? So that's a must do. Now go back to my question about, are you in the real estate business? Real world. Here. The development authority owned the building, but they had debt on that building. In other words, they were still paying for it, and it was a pretty good chunk. So, keep that in mind when I ask you some of these other questions about how you're going to structure that lease. Let me ask you this. This project was a big deal for this community. Above average wage, they had lost over 1,000 jobs, manufacturing jobs, in the previous 4 or 5 years before this project came along. The building was a good building. The company that was in it had left, gone out of business and left. That's why it was available. It was a former spec building, and the improvements needed to be made to retrofit it for this type of project. So just a few other points. You're still going to do the improvements. Somebody give me some ideas on this lease purchase option.
How much debt is on the building?
A lot. Several million. Okay? Several million. But Chrissy, to that point, are you going to pay that debt whether this project locates in that building or not? Guess what? You get to keep on paying it. All right? That's what's so hard for your leadership to sometimes understand. They see dollar signs. You need to see jobs. You need to see the, as this gentleman said, intangibles, but there was going to be some other tangible benefits. Number one, $10 million in local economic impact, that you couldn't get any of that money to help you with that debt service. But you still were going to pay for it whether you located this project or not. So just something to keep in mind. I try to remind folks that that debt is sunk cost. That's not. That's incremental. You can certainly try to recover every dime of that in your lease purchase proposal, but again, hard for the leadership to buy into that sometimes.
And for the local paper, that's going to look ugly on the front page.
Well,
Give them a building.
that's why I think we got to do the teamwork with them before this. They've got to be our ally. They've got to be writing about these high-paying jobs, this economic impact, and not if you lose money on your incentives or not. I know that's what they like to focus on, but build those relationships ahead of time. All right, give me some ideas on this lease purchase option.
The purchase option has covered the 450.
Okay, in other words, let's say you do it for 5 years, 70,000 square foot building in this area. The market rent would be about $2.50, okay, a square foot. I mean, if the building were ready to go, that's all they'd have to pay, okay, in this particular area. This isn't Metro Atlanta. Manufacturing space. So do you try to get $250 in year one? What do you do? Graduate, okay? In other words, what this board did is they said, let's get aggressive with our lease option. Let's offer, I don't know the number, but it was $1. I think it was less than that. It was 6 months free. Then go to $1 for 12 months after that. Then go to $1.50. Then go to $1.75. In other words, over 5 years, they worked up to that $250 price. But they were getting some payback on that $450. Any other ideas from anybody on the purchase option? I know some of you have seen this. You can jump in.
You can take that $450,000, and allow that to be used toward the purchase price of the building.
The rents they pay, the rents they pay, not that. In other words, if you're going to say at the end, you can buy the building for $2.5 million, let's say, if that was your final purchase price after you made the improvements. So what Wally is saying is every dollar you pay is going to reduce that final purchase price. Okay? What else? What else can you do on that purchase price? What's of value to you here? What's of value to you here?
The length of those jobs.
Yeah, the jobs and those wages, right? So let's say if you maintain 200 jobs, or let's just say at the end of 5 years, let's see how many permanent employees you have. You've got 200, we'll give you so much per job. If you've got 100, we're going to give you a fixed amount for 100. If you got 300, and that's what this board did, is they said, All rent payments reduce the purchase price. The purchase price is reduced by the actual number of jobs at year 5 times $2,500 a job. So if you had 200 jobs in place, we're going to knock 500 grand off the purchase price. You got 300 jobs in place, we're going to knock 750 off the purchase price. In other words, they're trying to make this a really attractive deal for them, and they're getting a contribution toward that sunk cost that they were going to continue to incur anyway. This community also did a very aggressive tax abatement schedule, 10 years at 100% on that $15 million in equipment. Now, all that said, did I need to run a loci to tell them whether they broke even or not? No. I see these, not frequently, but I see them often. And you know what my response is? You don't want to see the number. You don't want me to do it and see the number. What you want to do is you want to run to the local university and get them to do an economic impact analysis. Okay? That's what you want to do. Now, if you've got a board that can maintain some very good confidentiality and you really want to see the number, we can do it. But this is a lost leader. And why would they do that here? We talked about it earlier, but remember, they've lost 1,000 manufacturing jobs over 5 years. They were hurting at the time. And they said, we're going to buy this one for sure. And they did. And this was the DNX project located in Dublin 3 years ago. They make emission control systems for Caterpillar, John Deere, and other large equipment manufacturers. And it went into the El Dorado Stone building. El Dorado had trashed that building, and they had several $1 million in debt still on it, and they were paying for it. And so they went out. They had, fortunately, ahead of this project, taken SPLOST funds. They'd gotten an economic development funding plan in place with their county commissioners, and they took SPLOST funds, and they didn't wait on those dollars to come in over a period of years. They went out and monetized those SPLOST projected revenues. They got $10 million out of $15 million they were expected to get and got it up front. Then as the SPLOST money came in over time, they paid the bank back. So they had $10 million, and so they had $450 they could use for the building improvements, no problem. So, but they had a plan in place. Now, any questions? All right, summary here, and I'm going to show you just, I think, a couple other slides.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
How did the paper cover this?
Very positive. I mean, but again, they were focused on the jobs and the positive benefits. I'm not sure really how they did it, but I mean, Dubose at one time, he owns a newspaper, was a member of the leadership team. I mean, they didn't want to trash the authority for buying this. Okay, there was. As a matter of fact, I don't know that people know. How do I know? That actually they didn't tell me, but if I'm on fair game, if you apply for a Deal of the Year award, and I'm going to look at your submittal, okay? And I'm going to see what you did. And so this project did win a Deal of the Year, and that's where I got a lot of these facts and figures from. And I've got several others, Bill, that were really interesting. I commend you all for being creative. I think you're listening to what the project's needs are and trying to be unique in how you address those needs. In some areas of the state, a lot of times I see them doing different things with school board tax abatements versus what they're willing to do for county taxes. Okay, takeaway, and I'll close this out. Get your partnerships in place now. Even if you don't have that written down incentives policy, that tiered approach, go ahead and be getting your board to understand that you need one and why you need one. And get those partnerships in place now. I say reduce your dependence on tax abatements only because more of the projects that we're seeing, upfront costs are more critical. And you've got to find a way to be more creative in addressing those upfront costs. I'll, in a good way, pick on my good friend Bill Mitchell. When they located Chicken of the Sea, that project said we're going to be within 30 miles of Savannah. Bill, how far are you from Savannah?
It was like we were talking to.
Bill is 70 miles from Savannah, okay? And, definitely more than 30. Let's go with that. Okay? And Bill had a very good building at the time. It had just been expanded. And anyway, without getting into those nuts and bolts, the project manager had seen that building. They couldn't find anything in the Savannah area that was affordable. And the project manager said, look, there's a great building that's going exactly what you're looking for, that's very affordable, just look at it. And they agreed to look at it. And then the story took off from there. But they said, we're too far. We got all these extra logistics costs. And so Bill's team said, we'll pay you so much per truck for the first 2 years. We'll pay some of that extra incremental logistics cost. And the company said, if you give us that value up front, we'll sign on the dotted line. And Bill's team was able to do that because they had that teamwork in place. They had a funding mechanism in place. And so they put some upfront money on the table to offset some of the incremental logistics costs for the company. And since Chicken of the Sea is located there, just so for your ammunition for the newspaper, Bill, correct me with these facts if I misspeak here. Chicken of the Sea now has a canning facility and some extra space there. And in a second spec building that Bill's team built, U.S. Pet is since located. They use some of the leftover, some of the stuff you don't get in your can of tuna, it goes into pet food, okay? And U.S. Pet is there. And he's now doing his third.
I can't afford to
Oh,
No, I did not say that.
But, so why not take a risk sometimes? You got a building there. This project had a need. Try to address those critical needs and be innovative with your approach. All right, I didn't have anything here. The only takeaway here is you look where the significant light clusters are. We are seeing about 25% of the projects that we successfully helped locate last year were international projects. This area of the world, the economy's not doing so great. And so we're seeing a lot of Europe and Asian foreign investment projects trying to get into this market here. You guys seen any foreign direct investment projects? Okay. I enjoyed being with you. I hope this was helpful today. I'm going to be around for a while. If you have any questions, I'm glad to try to answer those. Thank you for your participation. We love your feedback.
And before everyone leaves, just a real quick plug. KJ, I want to make sure I let you know.
we do have a Facebook page and a Twitter page and a LinkedIn page. So if you are on Facebook, check us out. Select Georgia. Just search Select Georgia to see our logo. Same with Twitter, Select Georgia. I will be having photos up there. Try to keep everything professional. So try. So like us, share, retweet. We'll be getting that up.
Our next Select Success program will be in May. We're skipping April. It will be in May.